and well-wishers of Guyana across the globe. Thank you for joining this special event from Guyana and many parts of the world. I wanted to talk with you about two troubling matters that are plaguing our nation now. The first is a renewed aggressive stance by Venezuela toward our country, and the other is the ravages our people are enduring from the coronavirus, COVID-19. I especially wanted to give you the chance of posing questions to me, ministers and officials, concerning these two problems. My friends, these are extraordinary times for our country. While we stand on the cusp of remarkable economic and social development that heralds a better life for all, we are confronting a historic battle with an invisible but vicious enemy, COVID-19. The pandemic has already taken the lives of far too many of our people. One would have been bad enough, but the sudden and unexpected loss of 175 lives has cast a pall of grief over our nation. With 7,528 infected persons currently, we are striving to contain the virus, to stop its spread, and to protect all in our society. Amid this emergency in public health, our nation is almost made to confront renewed aggression from Venezuela, even as we seek peaceful and legal means to end its disregard for the long-settled definition of our borders. As President of our beloved country, my single most important responsibility is to keep the Guyanese people safe. It is the first thing I think about when I wake in the morning. It is the last thing on my mind at night. And my working day is consumed by it. But I want no mistake about it. My government is doing all in its power to vigorously protect our people's health and our country's territorial integrity. Just as we will not relent in the battle against COVID-19, so will we not bend to threats to our national security. We may be a small country, but we are a proud people. We have no military might, but we have moral and legal right. We pick fights with no one, but will resist threats from anyone. In doing so, we'll seek the protection of international law and the support of the international community. Let me now relate to you specific developments in relation to Venezuela that have occurred over the last 3 weeks. On January the 7th, the President of Venezuela, Mr. Nicolas Maduro, issued a decree before his country's National Assembly. In that decree, Mr. Maduro purported to establish a new maritime territory of Venezuela called the Territory for Development of the Atlantic Facade. He claimed, for Venezuela, sovereignty and exclusive sovereign rights in the waters and seabed adjacent to Guyana's coast, west of the Essequibo River. Our response to this was swift. We advised our sister states in the Caribbean community, CARICOM, and the international community, including the Organization of American States, the OAS, the Commonwealth, and the Organization of African, Caribbean, and Pacific States. Support for Guyana was immediate. CARICOM heads of government on January 12th publicly repudiated any acts of aggression by Venezuela against Guyana. The CARICOM leaders also reiterated their firm and unswerving support for the maintenance and preservation of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Guyana. Other nations, including the United States of America and Canada, also indicated their concern about this further threat to Guyana. It should be noted that President Maduro issued this decree even as the International Court of Justice pronounced that it has jurisdiction to hear and decide upon a case brought by Guyana in refutation of Venezuela's contention over the 1899 international arbitration that fixed our borders in a full, perfect, and final settlement. It is well known that Venezuela has rejected the jurisdiction of the ICJ. It is a matter of speculation as to whether the decree issued by the Venezuelan president was a reaction to the decision of the most authoritative international court, simply because it did not favor Venezuela. Be that as it may, on January 21st, we received distressing reports that a Venezuelan naval vessel had seized two Guyanese civilian fishing vessels, the Lady Neera and the Seawolf, operating off the coast of Winey Point within Guyana's exclusive economic zone. This incursion by Venezuela armed forces into Guyana's EEZ and its arrest and detention of the crews of Guyanese fishing boats is a flagrant violation of international law and the sovereign rights and jurisdiction of Guyana over its maritime space. The crews and the fishing vessels are still being detained by the Venezuelan military at Port Caraya. In Venezuela, despite Guyana's formal protests to the Venezuelan authorities through diplomatic channels. My government also immediately informed the international community of this latest violation of international law by Venezuela and its illegal and arbitrary arrest and detention of Guyanese citizens in Guyana's waters. Guyana has registered to the government of Venezuela its protests in the strongest possible terms at this unlawful and aggressive action against the state and people of Guyana, and has insisted upon the immediate release and return of the two Guyanese vessels and their crews. On January the 27th, CARICOM heads of government again publicly called on Venezuela to desist from aggressive acts that will seriously undermine the peace and security not only of Guyana and Venezuela, but the entire Caribbean region. Further, the CARICOM leaders called for the immediate release of the crew members and vessels. On the same day, the Organization of American States condemned the illegal detention of the two Guyanese registered fishing vessels and their crew. The OAS demanded the prompt and safe release of the crew and their boats and reiterated its support for the rules and processes set by international law regarding the ongoing territorial conflict. The OAS emphasized that the resolution of the issue between Venezuela and Guyana is a matter that lies under international jurisdiction and cannot be settled by unilateral actions. The Organization of 33 Countries was clear that any attempt to derail this international legal process, such as the decree issued by Maduro regime, is contrary to international law and standards and has no legal bearings or significance. My fellow Guyanese, I've given you all this detail because I want to stress that not only do we, Guyanese, regard our cause as right and just, but so too does the international community. We have friends. We are not alone. We have the international community behind us. I also want to advise that last night, I received a letter from the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Antonio Guterres, in which he reaffirmed on January 30th, 2018, he chose the ICJ as a means to be used for the solution of the controversy, as he was empowered to do under an agreement signed in Geneva by all parties in 1966. The Secretary General acknowledged that the court is proceeding to adjudicate the merits of the case, noting that the bilateral relationship between Guyana and Venezuela is broader than the controversy. Should both the government of Guyana and Venezuela wish to avail themselves of his good office's role to address other important issues, he remains available for that purpose. Guyana is fully committed to the ICJ process. We believe international law and independent international jurists of the highest caliber offer the most credible and definitive way in which to put an end to the Venezuelan contention. Therefore, we will continue to pursue that course. At the same time, Guyana is not averse to engaging Venezuela on bilateral matters in which we have a common interest. These will include dealing with the increasing number of Venezuelans now seeking refuge in Guyana, as well as how we might collaborate as neighboring states in contending with the COVID-19 pandemic, which has spared neither of our two countries. However, such discussions, while welcome, especially if the UN Secretary General wishes to play a good office's role, will have to be preceded by a clear demonstration by Venezuela that it will desist from any further acts of aggression against Guyana, starting with the release of the Guyanese fishermen and their vessels. Fellow Guyanese, we are a peaceful nation. We have always chose the path of peace and the rule of international law to resolve our issues. We will remain firmly on that path while we pursue justice for our country. In a few moments, I will turn my attention to our strategy in tackling the other threat, COVID-19. At this time, I would like to introduce members of the head table and other officials of the government of Guyana who will join me in taking questions and also in amplifying some of what I would have mentioned. We have, of course, our Prime Minister, Mark Phillips, our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Hugh Todd, our Advisor on Border, Mr. Carl Greenwich, our Chief of Staff, Brigadier Godfrey Bess, National Security Advisor, Jerry Gavaya, Commissioner of Police, Nigel Hoppy, Colonel Roberts, Inspector General GDF, Colonel Julius Skeet, General Staff GDF, Ambassador Elizabeth Harper, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and Mr. Robert Prasad, Foreign Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. Thank you very much, and we'll now proceed to taking your questions and ventilating these issues surrounding our borders. I just want to also update the general public that the team on the head table and other officials earlier this morning had a full briefing with the media and journalists, not only from Guyana, but also in the region. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Of course, Mr. President and Prime Minister and ministers. I would like to say a few words concerning the case that is before the ICJ, just so you can know what to expect. As you will recall, the President of the Court gave on December the 18th the decision of the Court as regards jurisdiction. The President mentioned that, and we know the Court has agreed to the substantive question we put to it, namely that whether it has jurisdiction to hear this case, and it concluded that it has jurisdiction, and we are now required, as a result of that, to organize ourselves to meet for the case management meeting, which will take place now on February the 26th, having been postponed twice. And at that case management meeting, the court will hear from each of the parties how long they need in order to formulate and present their cases. You're speaking of a period that could be 4 months, 6 months, 8 months, a year. So Guyana will be asked, its team, Venezuela will be asked, then the court will indicate whether or not it will be taking questions after the presentation, and whether there will be any oral exchanges. Subsequently, of course, the court will need some time to arrive at a decision. So that is what the court case management involves. They will also say whether or not any special procedures or anything special or out of the ordinary will be involved in those hearings. As you are aware, Venezuela has been saying that since it doesn't recognize the jurisdiction of the court, it will not participate. But we have not to take that for granted. We have to wait to hear what they will say, especially since they've gone to the extent of asking the court, if you like, to disturb its arrangements for what is actually a procedural exercise on February 16th. But as you would have heard the President say, the Secretary General, in fashioning what he called a way forward in 2016, did also mention the option of utilizing again or in parallel the diplomatic channels offered by the United Nations Secretary General's office, whether one works with it in the context of a good office or wider, it doesn't matter, but in essence, that is also an option we have to examine, and the letter that the President referred to needs to be considered by the team. The case, of course, requires that Guyana deal with a contention of invalidity, a contention of invalidity. The Venezuelans will have, since they're making the contention, will have to explain the reason they have for concluding that the 1899 treaty, which is a treaty that they subscribed to voluntarily and without any force, why it doesn't stand any longer. And Guyana's team will be required to refute that. So that is the process, whether there have been new treaties, whether actions have been taken to make that treaty invalid, whether, as sometimes contended, but Venezuela has never dared to bring that to a court, the contention that some fraud was involved in the decision of the panel, a panel in which Venezuela tried to find, and indeed had at the time, two of the most famous lawyers, at least outside of the United Kingdom, and the United Kingdom had theirs, and you had a president of the court who was a nominee for the Nobel Peace Prize for arbitration. So it's not any old person that you're accusing of fraud. And so we will see what it is that Venezuela has to offer in support of its case. Guyana's team, both the legal team that is abroad and based abroad, and the domestic team, which would include our own lawyers within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and outside, are ready and they are working on the preparation of the memorial, which will have to be delivered by the date set by the court. I hope that's clear. It is a reasonably straightforward process. Of course, what the ins and outs of the court are another matter in terms of we're not able to say whether or not Venezuela will participate and so forth. But that in essence is the process ahead of us, Mr. President, and I thank you very much and hand you back the floor.
So we can move to the questions that would have been coming in.
Yes, Mr. President. Good afternoon. Questions that came in from the Facebook Live. You have Michael Trotz is asking, to what extent is the government engaging national stakeholders, including opposition parties in Parliament, to build a national front approach on the border controversy? There are three other questions. You want me to go all of?
Oh, let's take them one at a time. First of all, let me make it very clear that as it relates to our border, we are one Guyana, and we are all together in ensuring that our territorial integrity and sovereignty is protected. Let there be no doubt that in the protection of our sovereign rights and our territorial integrity, Guyana is united, strong, and together on this matter. In relation to the direct question of engagement, as I mentioned in the conclusion of my remarks, just this morning we had a regional and national engagement with media, journalists. We have had other engagements, briefing with civil society, the Parliamentary Sectorial Committee, with the opposition and the Foreign Minister, with the private sector, with other political parties that are not in Parliament. But I'll ask the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who has been engaged directly in some of those briefings and discussions, to further amplify on this.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. Indeed, we've had several discussions, beginning with the parliamentary subcommittee discussion on the border controversy, where the members were briefed. We've had suggestions on the way forward in terms of taking a national approach in dealing with the controversy, and that has been well embraced by the team. We've signed a document at the end of that meeting which showed that we were all on board in unison as we move forward in the protection of our sovereign rights and territorial integrity. We've also had a stakeholder engagement where we met with stakeholders within society, where we had a briefing, and we've had also discussions, recommendations put forward by our stakeholders. And coming out of that meeting, it was agreed that we will continue to meet as necessary so that we can continue to advance our interests as a collective. The President just did mention that we've also had a meeting with the media in Guyana, and we've had representatives from the Caribbean community as well, including Haiti. So we've had an extensive discussion this morning. Our agent, Mr. Greenidge, would have given a detailed background and history, context, and way forward. And we've also had other discussions from other members on the panel, as well as questions being taken from our media operatives. So we believe that we've had a very successful event. We were able to clarify a lot of the matters that they've had. So there's clarity moving forward. There were recommendations made as well, which we agreed to deal with. And all in all, we agreed that we will have a national approach. There's no disunity when it comes to the controversy in successive governments, and it's not going to change now when we have a process that is showing that we can actually bring this entire controversy to a finality. So I think that we have the momentum. The President is heavily invested, and he's given direction in that regard. Thank you.
Just to add, we have also engaged a veteran media consultant, public relations consultant, Kit Nascimento, who is working with us, and we're hoping to bring together all the key players in the society on a public education program also that will not only target the general population, but directly children and our schools and so on. So that is also added to what we're doing. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. President. The second question here that came in from Charlene Ross. Has the government received any firm indication beyond verbal support from any of Guyana's international partners that you can share that will physically prevent additional Guyanese fishermen or others from being illegally captured by the Venezuelans?
Well, as I would have said in the statement, we have strong condemnation from international organizations and bilateral partners from CARICOM itself. That is the first phase that we sought to have this international condemnation, and there is international support for Guyana in relation to this. As I said, we pursue the resolution of our conflict. We are committed to the ICJ, to peaceful resolution, and also through diplomacy. And through diplomacy, we've seen overwhelming support from the international community for Guyana case and Guyana cause. I will ask also the Chief of Staff who is here to add to this on some of the discussions we are having, because he is also engaging international partners and regional partners. But as you would appreciate, this is a sensitive matter, and there are sensitive issues also that we're dealing with. I'll ask him to add a few words, and also the Minister and the advisor on borders.
Okay, as the Chief of Staff, I would like to start by saying that the Guyana Defense Force is committed to defending Guyana's territory. The Chief of Staff has met with his leadership team, and His Excellency has given us clear intent, which is to defend Guyana's territory, and we're committed to peaceful resolution of this situation and to the ICJ. The Guyana Defense Force continue to forge this matter using defense diplomacy. We are continuing to cooperate and work with our friendly militaries in the Caribbean and further afield, which include our neighbor Brazil and Suriname. Our soldiers are strategically positioned to ensure that Guyana's patrimony is upheld, and are committed to ensuring that the defense of this country continue to be our main objective. I must say also that we have great support from retired chiefs of staff, senior military officers, and soldiers and members of the Guyana People Militia who've been reaching out and pledging their support to the Guyana Defense Force. But the Commander-in-Chief intent is very clear, and we're pursuing this matter using defense diplomacy and committed to the peaceful settlement of this situation. While our military might be small, I'm leading men and women who have big heart to defend this country. Thank you.
Another question here from Guyana Wilberg from... Oh,
Just that, Mr. President, we live in a rule-based international system, and you will always find when a country or countries violate those international rules and norms that condemnation will be brought to bear. And this is an indication of what Venezuela is being faced with. They're the ones who are breaking the international rules, and that is why you're seeing the kinds of statements coming out of our partners and friends. Because when one country decides to break the rules, they will be condemned. So this is nothing strange. This is not a case where countries are favoring Guyana over Venezuela. Countries are supporting us because we are committed to a rule-based international environment, and that is simply put. Thank you.
Just a small comment, Mr. President, in relation to the questions being posed as to how and whether one is going to mobilize force to meet force. In the first instance, in international relations, in this international arena that we operate in today, the first response of allies and of the international community who might not even be allies is to use diplomatic means. The first reaction isn't to meet breaches of the international law with force. They use the various devices at their means and escalate these as recalcitrant persists. So don't expect tomorrow that suddenly, necessarily, the international community is going to send troops and boats overnight to fix this problem. They'll bring pressure to bear on Venezuela and escalate that until such time as they deem any other action necessary. Okay?
Thank you, Mr. President. Just to add my voice, I like to communicate to the Guyanese people that 1899 represents the full and final settlement of the border between Guyana and Venezuela. We are dealing with a controversy that Venezuela raised 62 years after the full and final settlement of our border between Guyana and Venezuela. A controversy that went through a good officer process, and a controversy that is now before the International Court. You heard that diplomacy is our first line of defense. What is important now is for Venezuela to adhere to and observe the international rule of law and allow the judicial process to take its course to its finality. Thank you.
Before I go to your other questions, this question was passed to me on how will these recent action by President Maduro affect diplomatic relations with Guyana. First of all, as I said in my statement, that we are committed to bilateral discussion on matters that we have commonality on, matters that is of joint concern. COVID-19, for example, the Venezuelan migrants coming over to Guyana. But we, on the issue of the border, we have outlined very clearly and definitively the route of the ICJ. And these discussions on bilateral relations, to precede these discussions, any discussion, we must have the immediate commitment of Venezuela to desist from the aggression and to release immediately the vessels and the crews. In addition to this, both countries continue to share embassies in the two capitals, so there is still diplomatic presence, full diplomatic presence in both capitals. I think we have addressed that. It was consumed in the answers that we would have provided previously. Can you use a mic so the viewers can
The Court Campbell of the newsroom, he's asking what are the implications of reports that Guyanese fishermen had protected hammerhead shark among their catch?
Well, we can't answer to anything we don't have any official report on. These are things that are in the media. What the facts, everything in my address represents factual position. And we are dealing with matters of fact and addressing those issues.
The other question there is, there were reports of a third vessel detained. Is there any truth to this?
The vessels that we are addressing are the vessels that I would have outlined in my statement. Those are the two vessels that we have been following up, the two crews. I've named the two vessels. Those are the two vessels held by Venezuela. Those are the families we're communicating with, the owners of the boats, and that is where we are in relation to the vessels.
Another question from a citizen here, Paul Pierre. He's asking, can you share any information on the state of mind of the family members of the detained fishermen and any details on what the government is doing to comfort, reassure, and provide for their sustenance while their breadwinners remain in captivity?
Well, first of all, we clearly outlined the aggressive position we're taking, and every day we are on this. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, much of it we cannot speak about now, but Minister of Foreign Affairs has been engaging various parties to ensure the urgent and safe return of the vessels and the crew. The Chief of Staff, I asked the Chief of Staff to lead a delegation to meet with family members. He did so. I'm going to ask him to address you on that specifically. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Chief of Staff, they're in constant contact with the boat owners and representative of family members and crew. And very shortly, we'll be engaging the families. We've already outlined a strategy in ensuring that, that their economic well-being is taken care of, to ensure that, that psychologically and the psychological and moral support is also given to them. These are all things that are currently ongoing, and very shortly the Minister of Human Services will be meeting with the families to outline a course of action in this regard. I'm going to ask the Chief of Staff to also brief you on his meeting.
Okay, last Sunday, the Commissioner of Police and I would have met with the families of the two vessels that were kidnapped from Guyana's EEZ. In meeting those families, we indicated to them that the executive is very concerned and will continue to do everything within our power diplomatically to ensure that their loved ones and their vessels are returned to Guyana in the shortest possible manner. I'm aware since then that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has continued to have discussions with the Foreign Affairs counterpart in Venezuela, and also has been talking to the family. We've also assured the family that the Guyana Defense Force will continue to work to ensure that our environment be conducive for them to carry out their usual economic activity, because we will continue to patrol our EEZ and to be strategically positioned at our border positions.
Thank you. In addition to what the Chief of Staff would have mentioned, we at the Foreign Affairs would have met with the captains also for the vessels. We were properly briefed. We gave the captains reassurance that at the level of government, the owners, thank you, that we will do everything within our power to ensure that we can secure an early release of the crews and vessels. Subsequently, we have been in touch with the family members of the crews, and that is on a daily basis. Getting updates from them, and we doing likewise, updating them. So as far as we're aware, they're in good shape. We know that some of them may need help if they're held for much longer. And as the President would have mentioned, government will take steps to ensure that the humanitarian assistance will be given to not only the families here in Guyana, but also for the crew members who are still being detained in Venezuela. Thank you.
Just to add, the Guyana Defense Force, and this has always conducted various training exercises within our EEZ. This is nothing new. There is nothing sinister about this. Yes. And the Guyana Defense Force in recent times continue in its usual tradition to conduct such training activities in our EEZ, and there are also regional collaboration, international collaboration, and bilateral collaboration in other training exercises within the normal operation of the GDF. And these exercises will continue. You know, for example, historically we have the trade winds exercise. These are nothing new. These are exercises that existed a long time ago. So I just want to make it very clear that all the joint exercises that were conducted were part of our normal operations, normal training programs, and exchange programs that we would have had. I also want to say that the Guyana Defense Force has been actively monitoring and actively informing me as Commander-in-Chief as to the various developments in relation to our EEZ, our airspace, and even our border itself along the land. They remain committed, strong, and vigilant in these areas, and that will continue.
A question here, Mr. President, from Dennis Chabral of Demerara Waves. What advice is being given to the local and foreign mariners as far as using the waterways offshore Essequibo region to fish and transport cargo and to and from Guyana?
Well, our advice is basically our EEZ remains open. It is our EEZ. Our EEZ remains open. It is our EEZ. And we have stepped up the monitoring of our EEZ. So that's it. It's open. I'll ask Carl, the Chief of Staff, and the Minister or the Prime Minister if they want to add anything to this.
Mr. President, I'd just like to endorse what you have said concerning the ownership of the EEZ. I think the important thing to note here, and I'm not saying this lightly because I know that that there are hazards, that Venezuela would be very happy if Guyanese were to decide, out of fear of Venezuela, they would all get up and leave Essequibo, or perhaps leave the whole Guyana. That's their intention, because they can then say to the world, look, these people don't really want this territory. They recognize that they're there improperly or they're not there legally, and so they're not using it. You have to avoid that. I'm saying that aware of the risks that are run. And maybe ask the teams, the crews that go out, to be especially alert and careful. Perhaps the GDF can find some communication mechanism by which they keep in touch with them as far as possible to see what might be done or what advice may be given if the GDF has spotted in particular zones or areas hazards. So we can improve our communication on our side. I hope GDF can answer to that themselves. But I think what the Venezuelans would like to see is the abandonment of our marine resources in the first instance. They would be too happy. Thank you.
Without giving out any sensitive information, I would want to assure the Guyanese that we continue to work with our regional partners, friendly military countries. We also continue to monitor our sea space. We're out there also by air, and we also have recently met with the mariners and included the fishery and marine. And we've had discussions, and we'll continue to ensure that we have information sharing with our fisher folks, all the persons that are using our sea space to ensure that their economic life continue. We will continue to work with our people while we continue to collaborate with our regional and international military persons who have been doing operations and exercises with us.
Mr. President, a question here from a member of the public, Surasati Singh. She's asking, what role do you see the media playing in its daily work with regards to Guyana's current border situation with Venezuela, and what kinds of engagement is the government pursuing?
Well, the media plays a very important role, not only here in Guyana, but also in the diaspora, regionally and globally. We have to ensure that the factual information, the right narrative is out there, and that is what the team is working on. But here in Guyana, I think the media must understand that they also have a great responsibility to report accurately, to ensure that the fact check, this is very critical, to ensure what is out there are the real facts, to adopt a nationalistic approach to this. There is nothing political, there's nothing that separates us on this. We are one on this. So it is important too that they are fully educated on the issue, one, and they're fully informed on the issue. And we have a responsibility to keep them informed. And I think after the meeting this morning, that mechanism has been created where the media will be constantly kept abreast and informed with the development. And in that way, they can help in promoting the accurate news. You have seen a lot of misstatement, a lot of propaganda out of Venezuela in relation to the court matter itself. And we have been able to dispel those. The international community has joined us in dispelling those, but the media has a key and critical responsibility, and yes, they'll be fully integrated in this. I also saw a question from Mr. Gordon Mosley. You have those questions, if you can also read those questions so we can address them.
Yes, Mr. President. Gordon Mosley from News Sources asking, the foreign minister earlier this week told the National Assembly that Venezuela has increased its activities within Guyana's EEZ. When Guyana first learned of this occurrence, and was it noticed during recent joint patrols by the Guyana and U.S. Coast Guards? I have three others. Should I go all three?
Yes, go all the questions.
The second one is, what is the latest on the condition of the fishermen? Has Guyana's diplomatic representative in Caracas been able to meet with the fishermen? Then, has Guyana officially engaged the new U.S. government on the current situation with Venezuela? And finally, is there any concern that Venezuela could also threaten the oil production vessels?
So let me be very clear that we are committed, as Carl said, the entire team said, to first of all engaging on this matter in a diplomatic manner. The international community has responded in a diplomatic manner to this controversy. But there are phases in response from all the stakeholders. So we have not only informed the U.S., we have informed all our partners, we've informed the entire international community, international organizations, Brazil, our neighbors, because what the Venezuelans are pursuing also has implications for immediate regional partners. So it's important for us to understand this. It has implications for Brazil, Barbados, Suriname, Trinidad and Tobago. It has implications for all those. And we have been engaging. The engagement has been very responsible engagement, but I can say to you, very active engagement. Venezuela has adopted an aggressive mode. We are, as I said, our key responsibility is to protect the interests of Guyana within our EEZ. The oil production is within our EEZ, and our responsibility with our international partners is to ensure that all our activities within our EEZ is protected. Beyond that, I would not venture out at this moment. In relation to the condition of the fishermen, I know both the Chief of Staff and the Foreign Minister has been engaging the family members who are in contact, the boat owners who are in contact, and also our representatives in Caracas. I'll ask both of them to address that, the condition of the fishermen and their present status. And then on the issue of when we first learned of the activities within our EEZ and whether it was during the recent joint patrol by Guyana and the U.S. Coast Guard, the Chief of Staff will address those also. Please, Minister, and then Chief.
Thank you, Mr. President. When I met with the Foreign Minister of Venezuela, he did give a commitment that the captain and crew will be treated with all international, under the international law. Their humanitarian rights would not be infringed upon. And our conversations with the relatives here in Guyana does not give us any concerns of worrying that they're not being treated fairly. The Foreign Minister did mention that they will be held on the vessel with security, so they're not in a detention facility, so the threat of them contracting COVID would be severely minimized, and that's a health rescue for us, so we're comfortable with that. But beyond that, I think that they're safe based on the information that we've been getting from the families here and what was coming out of Caracas. Nothing to the contrary. Thank you.
We would have observed that the Venezuelan Navy ships have been in our EEZ from the 14th of January, and they have been there intermittently, and we recognize that their mode of movement has been in our EEZ approximately 60 nautical miles east of our median line and approximately 25 nautical miles from the coast of Guyana. The last time they would have been there was on the 27th of January, and we continue to log their operations and inform Foreign Ministry of their operations. The Guyana Defense Force is also prepared, and we are doing patrols in our EEZ to ensure that our presence are felt in the EEZ. We also did aerial patrols to confirm sightings of their Navy military vessels, and we've confirmed that they were there.
Thank you very much, Chief of Staff, members of the head table and the team. I want to thank you for your time in addressing this first issue. Members of the public, media, international community, I thank you for your time in joining us and for your time in sharing those questions with us. I hope you were able to bring greater clarity. I want you to understand that Guyana is together and united on this issue. It is our patriotic and national duty to defend our country and to play a part in the defense of our country, and our people are together and one on this. And nothing that threatens our integrity, our territorial integrity, would divide us or separate us, but rather it unites us in action, in defending and standing up for territorial integrity in a peaceful manner. Thank you very much, and we will now, in a few moments, move to the second component of today's discussion, and that is to deal with the coronavirus, COVID-19 pandemic, to update you on our current situation, and also to bring to you an update in relation to our journey towards the vaccine. Fellow Guyanese, we just spoke on one of the issues I wanted to address you on, and that is the Venezuelan-Guyana border controversy. I wish now to talk to you on the greatest challenge that faces our world and our own country. It is the COVID-19 pandemic. We are all by now aware that there are a number of vaccines in the various stages of development and approval. But the world is competing to access these vaccines, and each country is in that competition. We are guided by the World Health Organization and Pan American Health Organization. And like every other country, big and small, our objective is to obtain a vaccine as soon as possible for our people. In pursuit of this goal, our government is working with multilateral and bilateral partners, and at the same time, directly negotiating with the primary manufacturers of these vaccines to access them for Guyana. Last year, Guyana joined the COVAX and is now eligible to receive vaccines for 20% of our population, which will be free of cost. We expect to receive approximately 3,800 vaccines in February and March, which will be assigned immediately for people, our frontline health workers, people with comorbidities, and our elderly. We are also working with CARICOM, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and the European Union for a quota of vaccines. At the bilateral levels, the government of Guyana has had productive discussions with the government of India, the government of China, and the government of Russia. The government of China has confirmed that it will be donating 20,000 doses of vaccines to Guyana. Discussions are ongoing, and arrangements to acquire vaccines from these countries will be finalized very shortly. We are also negotiating with the major manufacturers, Pfizer, Biotech, Moderna, and AstraZeneca, and hope shortly to finalize the supply of vaccines from these manufacturers. In short, your government is wholly committed to obtaining vaccines in the shortest possible time, utilizing every means at our disposal for our people. While we work to access the vaccines, we are organizing to implement their distribution. We're installing and extending the cold chain infrastructure for safely storing the vaccines, and personnel are actively in training to get the job done. I want you to feel confident, indeed, to feel certain that when the vaccines arrive and we begin to distribute them, they will have the full approval of the World Health Organization and will be safe. I will be the first to demonstrate this by signing on to the vaccination program. It is important, however, that we understand that as we roll out vaccines, we must still observe and respect all the precautions and preventative measures to remain safe. I repeat, wear your mask, wash your hands, keep your distance, and stay home unless it is absolutely necessary to be out. Fellow Guyanese, I would like to say to you that the issue of the vaccine is one that has engaged policymakers around the world in different forms. The question as to who should take the vaccine is one that will be left entirely up to the population. These vaccines will not be made mandatory, although we want to encourage every Guyanese to take the vaccine. The vaccine is an important part of building the immunity, getting to herd immunity that forms a critical component in addressing and fighting the pandemic. In addition to this, I assure you that all the vaccine will be free of cost to the people of Guyana. We are sparing no resources, and we are leaving no stone unturned. We are aggressively pursuing every avenue through which we can expeditiously get these vaccines and make them available to the population. In addressing the issue of COVID-19 holistically, joining me this morning is our Minister of Health, Dr. Frank Anthony, our Prime Minister and Chair of the Task Force, Mark Phillips, our Dr. Narayan Singh, CMO Acting, Dr. Hamilton, Director of Primary Healthcare Services, and of course she will have the job of ensuring we have a smooth process of not only getting the vaccines out, but safely administering those vaccines to the population. And Dr. Zulfikar Box, National Emergency Medical Director. So at this point, I'll invite Dr. Frank Anthony to further elaborate on the current situation in relation to the pandemic, our response, and where and how we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, His Excellency, President Irfaan Mohamed, Prime Minister, Mr. Mark Phillips, and the team from the Ministry of Health, fellow Guyanese. It is very important that we talk about where we are today in the pandemic and what strategies we are using to combat SARS-CoV-2 in Guyana. As you know, we have ramped up our response in many ways.
In the medical side of things, we have expanded our health services, we have expanded our hospital beds, and we have built ICU capacity. And this is across the country. So for every region in Guyana, we now have beds where if there's a COVID positive patient, we can treat that patient at a regional hospital. In addition, we have added capacity for isolation, both institutional isolation or home isolation. And of course, we have quarantine facilities that are available to persons who need to be in quarantine. As of today, we have 837 active cases, and there are a few spots that we are monitoring, including Waramadong, where we have 38 cases. We have a medical team that has been deployed to that community, and they have been testing and ensuring that the population there complies with the COVID guidelines. We have also, about 2 weeks ago, had some challenges in Maracaibo, but because we have taken proactive measures and we have a team that is currently on the ground, we have seen those cases reduce to now about 16 active cases. And so we continue to do the monitoring across our country, and every 24 hours we are able to have an update on all the RHOs and other persons who are involved in the response would normally have an early morning meeting where all these matters are being discussed. Currently in our hospitals, at the Ocean View facility, we have 19 patients, 6 of whom are in the ICU, and we have 2 persons who are in the Linden Hospital with COVID-19. So we continue to have monitoring and to make sure that our patients, once they come into our facility, are given the best medical care that we have available. In terms of the vaccine, His Excellency would have outlined the many efforts that we are making in terms of acquiring the vaccine. And of course, we have the multilateral arrangements, bilateral, and dealing with the manufacturers. In getting ourselves ready in Guyana, we have developed a vaccine deployment plan, and we have started to make sure that sites in every region are prepared and expanded so that we can store more vaccine and be able to roll that out to the general public. 14 sites right now are under expansion. We are hoping to complete that by the end of next week or maybe in the following week. And we have also acquired freezers ranging from -70 to the regular freezers. The -70 freezers, we are expecting to have an additional 15 freezers in country within the first 2 weeks of February. We have placed an order for a number of -20 freezers, and a number of them are expected next month as well, and the regular freezers that we are buying locally. In terms of the persons who are being trained, we are training 35 teams of persons. This would include nurses with experience and other healthcare workers with experience who would be able to deliver this vaccine. When we administer this vaccine, it's also about making sure that it's at the right temperature to be administered. Then we give the vaccine, we have to record the information, we have to give the persons who are receiving the vaccine a vaccination card, and then we'll keep them for a few minutes to be able to observe them to make sure that there's no adverse reaction. And our staff has been trained to do all of these things and to make sure that they are able to deliver the vaccine in the most appropriate manner. We have estimated with these 35 teams that we have that we'll be able to do at least 7,000 vaccines per day when we start the rollout process. We have also been, right now we have conducted a survey in terms of doing the risk analysis about how people might react to vaccines, what is called a hesitancy survey. We have the results of that, and based on that, we have developed a risk communication plan that as soon as we, just before we start rolling out vaccines, that we'll be able to roll that out. So, Mr. President, we are prepared and we are ready. So once we get the vaccine once we start receiving the vaccines, we will be able to deploy them as rapidly as possible and in the safest manner as possible. So I'll probably stop there. And
Thank you, Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. President. As the coordinator of the National Task Force on COVID-19, I wish to speak to all Guyanese here, first by appealing to you to be responsible and to adhere to the measures that are put in place to protect all of us. We have to, all of us have to wear our masks. We have to practice social distancing, and we have to sanitize as often as possible. The task force has taken an approach where we seek to educate, engage, and encourage all Guyanese to adhere to the measures. And finally, to enforce those measures. A quick outline, the curfew. At present, we have a curfew from 10:30 p.m. to 4 a.m. We appeal to all Guyanese to observe, adhere to the curfew. We have measures here as it pertains to the opening of businesses and the conduct of other activities, be it entertainment or whatever, because we recognize that while we want you to observe the measures to curb the spread of COVID-19 and to protect and save lives, at the same time, we have to find the right balance and have the economic activities, which represents the livelihood of the people, to continue in a disciplined, orderly manner. And therefore, it is our view from the task force that if we, as a people, adhere to the measures and conduct our economic and other activities in keeping with the protocols outlined, that will help us to contain or reduce the spread of COVID-19 throughout Guyana. We have communities that are doing a good job at adhering to the measures, and we have seen the results of low COVID-19 transmission in those communities. But then we also have other communities that are throwing caution to the wind and not observing the measures. And those are the communities that are problematic. So first of all, let us all throughout Guyana adhere to the measures, because it is the adherence to the measures that will protect us. The Ministry of Health is there to test, trace, and treat people who've contracted the virus. But if we adhere to the measures, that will reduce in a great way, in a significant way, our people contracting the COVID-19. We've had some other measures where recently you would have heard that we have suspended flights between Brazil and Guyana. That's the flight from Ogle to Bovista has been suspended. We continue to have flights departing from Ogle and to Mary to North America and to the Caribbean, but with strict adherence to the COVID-19 protocols as it pertains to testing and tracing. We see no reason why we should not continue those flights, but again, you want to impress upon everyone that they must adhere to the protocols, submit to the tests. On arrival in Guyana, submit to the test before you seek to enter Guyana. Because it is our view that if all of us, and I said again, all of us adhere to the measures, that will help to curb the spread of COVID-19. On the economic and social side, we continue to offer relief, the $25,000 per household. That exercise is continuing, and it is our intent to reach every household in Guyana and deliver the $25,000. In addition to that, we have sanitation hampers and food hampers that we are distributing to communities that are considered to be in need of those relief supplies. So all in all, we have a set of measures, we have a set of protocols, and so far the task force is operating in a multi-sectoral manner, and we have good engagements with the private sector, the Tourism and Hospitality Association of Guyana, and with other government agencies, critical government agencies, in addition to the Ministry of Health, the Guyana Tourism Authority, and of course, many leaders in the Guyanese society. And we want to continue to working towards curbing or reducing the spread. Some people don't like to hear the word curb, but definitely to work hand in hand with all organizations and all Guyana to reduce the spread of COVID-19 in our country, because COVID-19 is a national security issue for us in Guyana today.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. I just want to add that the Central Bank has also extended the measures to help businesses, small businesses, medium-sized businesses. The measures that were announced through the banking system, those measures has been extended until August of this year. The facilities that were embodied in those measures are also extended by the various commercial banks. I also want to say that, as Dr. Anthony would have said, vaccination is not the end to the problem. Whilst we are expeditiously moving towards vaccination, it will give us a handle of the situation. We want to set the population in a framework to receiving the vaccines, because that is what we are pushing ahead on now. And very shortly, we will have successes announced in the vaccines coming into our country and being available. So we can now move to the questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. President. Questions from the various Facebook pages as well as inbox, starting with one, Victor Fortune. And he's asking, when is Guyana expected to receive the vaccine through the COVAX facility, and will the government be receiving enough for universal coverage of the population?
Well, I think we have addressed that. The COVAX facility would commence sometime in February, but definitely not enough to cover the population. For a matter of fact, that is why we have to explore, and we're exploring aggressively all other available avenues, because they're targeting 20%, and that the time frame of that on that 20% is not defined as yet also.
A question here from Natalie Odwin. She's asking, will frontline workers and the elderly be given priority?
Dr. Anthony, you want to address that?
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for that question. We have an allotment plan that we have developed, and of course, the first set of persons that we want to give the vaccine to would be our frontline workers. And then we'll go to the elderly and persons with comorbidity. So our rollout plan is to start with those who are at higher risk of getting COVID, and then we go to the other groups of people. But if we are able to secure enough vaccines, then we will be able to roll this out faster and cover most people.
But just to add to what Dr. Anthony is saying, remember, we are not making this mandatory. So whilst the vaccine will be available throughout the implementation phase for our frontline workers, the other groups will have time frame as to when they take the vaccines. Because if they don't adhere to those time frames, then we go to the next segment of the population.
The next question here from a Shalini Ram. Will the government engage the national media fraternity in focused information exchanges on the vaccine and the rollout plan as a means of stopping misinformation?
Well, thank you again for that question. I think that's a very important question, because one of the things that have, while we have this pandemic, we have also had a lot of misinformation that it was peddled throughout the pandemic. So it's absolutely important that we constantly engage the media and update the media about what our plans are. As I mentioned in my brief presentation, I spoke about the hesitancy survey that we have, and subsequently developing a communication risk plan. We have been able to develop that plan with our local resources and in collaboration with Johns Hopkins University. And so that plan would be rolled out, where we would be able to address many of the concerns that persons would have pertaining to the vaccines that we are using.
All right, there is one other question here. Can you give an assurance that both doses of the vaccine will be available in Guyana's stock?
Well, we are giving the assurances that when the vaccine comes, and we are aggressively going after the vaccines, and we are catering for both doses to be available to the population.
Get the other questions here. There's one here from Kurt Campbell. The Economist reported that Guyana will only achieve full vaccination coverage until 2023. Do we plan to achieve full coverage before that projected time?
The pathway that we're taking is to accelerate vaccination rates in 2021. And so that's why our effort is going beyond COVAX, because COVAX is only catering for 20% of our population in 2021, and we want to increase that because, as the President rightly said, if we are going to exit the pandemic, we would need to achieve herd immunity, and many of the experts think for us to get to herd immunity, we probably need to immunize close to 80% of our population. So we are striving to be able to immunize as many persons as possible in 2021.
Just want to add to Dr. Anthony, that is why we're sparing no effort. Human resources, training, financial resources, and we are pursuing all avenues to get as much vaccines to cover the population as quickly as possible. And the plan to roll that out, the plan to ensure that we quickly get that to the population is also there. But also there's another variable, and that is where the media, the public education, and the ministry work comes in, and that is to ensure that the acceptance level by the population itself of the vaccine is there so that we can achieve the immunization.
There is one other question here. This one is coming from Demerara Waves. The question here is, why is the police force not enforcing the measures even in areas very close to police stations and outposts, such as the Georgetown Seawall and Starbrook Market outposts?
Uh, the Guyana Police Force and the entire task force geared at enforcing the COVID measures has been doing a good job in most instances. Enforcement for us is not only removing people and taking people in, but enforcement is also education, distribution of masks, and also in a soft manner, getting people to understand. And I agree with Shabra that sometimes when you pass on a seawall or in other crowded areas, you wonder what is taking place. The question is, well, as Dr. Anthony said, you wonder sometimes whether people understand that we are living in a COVID environment. And that is where the public education and information is important. Do we take in 500 persons on the seawall? Or go through Starbrook Market or Border Market where we get calls all the time, even some establishments, and remove everybody from the market? There is a balance, and sometimes we have to deal with reality and be realistic. And as president, that is how I've really gone after the job, in a realistic manner. Can we walk into the market now where people are, obviously a lot of people are there, and collect everyone or pick up everyone? Is it realistic? When you pick up persons too, you have to put them somewhere. We also have a great responsibility in keeping the prisons safe. Dr. Anthony mentions that. Because the prisons themselves are an important area, a high-risk area. So managing COVID, managing the enforcement aspect of COVID is really not a simple task. And sometimes, you know, I hear the harsh criticisms on the police or the task force itself. But trying to understand the realities in which they're operating. So what they have tried to do is to do a soft and a medium approach to dispel the crowds. We have asked them now to go with loud hailers to these areas and deliver specific messaging for the removal of people. These are all things that we're doing. Whilst all of that is happening, the Prime Minister will tell you, I can tell you, that we have hundreds of restaurants, bar owners, small business owners coming to see us in the public outreaches at the ministry, highlighting their concerns also. So as policymakers and as the government, working with the practitioners, the medical practitioners, and the specialists, we have to come up with the right balance. And I agree with Shabral that more aggression might be needed in some of these areas, but the plan is to move from, we're at medium now, and it will get more intense. PM.
Thank you, Mr. President. I too would agree with Shabral to some extent, but I want to say that while enforcement is important, the watchword for all of us in this fight against COVID-19 is responsibility. Many of the countries around the world that are doing a good job at curbing the spread of COVID-19 If you do a study, you will see the citizens are the ones who took a responsible role in adhering to the measures and ensuring that their family and their community adhere to those measures. The police force is there to do their work. I did outline earlier that our focus is on education, engagement, encouragement, and finally, enforcement. But the onus is on us as a people to be responsible for our own lives. And if you're responsible for your own life, you will adhere to the measures. And you will ensure, starting with your family, that they adhere to the measures, and starting with the workers who work for you, or co-workers, adhere to the measures. And that itself would lead to a culture of greater adherence to the measures. That is what will save us as a people. Not just everybody wants to operate in a lawless or manner and just hope that the police could come out of the blues and be the one to enforce everything. We are the first enforcers by being responsible and adhering to the measures.
Thank you very much, PM.
Mr. President, a question here from Gord Mosley, News Source. How does the task force justify the opening up of bars at 40% capacity at a time when the country has recorded more than 1,200 new cases in less than 30 days? How many persons may prefer their private doctors, private hospitals to carry out their vaccination? Is the government open to allowing private hospitals to import and conduct COVID vaccinations?
Well, to deal with both questions, first of all, Gordon, I'll ask Dr. Anthony to get into the details, but I'll just say to you that we have increased our capacity to deal with COVID tremendously. Not only at the Lenendal facility, but in terms of level of awareness, type of treatment, and everything. That is why, although we have had increases so far, and we hope this trend the trend that I'm going to allude to continue, the transition to the ICU has been managed remarkably well, in that we didn't have that big transition as we had before. But as I said, this is no indication that tomorrow it can be different, because you have more cases. But I'm going to allow the experts to pronounce more on that. So we have increased capacity. So we are faced with a question of finding the balance. How do we ensure that we can safely find some way in which economic activity can continue at a minimum? At a minimum. Now, industry standard is that 35%, you need 35% occupancy to even carry your overhead costs. You have a situation before you. Whether all these businesses are allowed to go into bankruptcy and foreclosure, or do we try to find a safe way in which minimal risk is exposed, in which you can still maintain the social distancing, whilst at the same time sustaining these businesses? And based on the analysis with the task force, GTA, TAG, the private sector, and we are coming under tremendous pressure too, for cinemas, etc. But we have been able to curtail it to this group of small and medium-sized businesses, some a bit larger, in a safe manner that still allows some sorts of social distancing. And we have teams going out, verifying what number is 40%, and placing that on the door. That's the first thing. The second thing is, in relation to the private hospitals being part of this vaccination program. Yes, private hospitals will be involved. For a matter of fact, they're already engaged. Dr. Anthony will elaborate on that. and they will be part of the process. All of Guyana has to be engaged. The private sector, the Two-Showers Council, the trade unions. This is a national task where all stakeholders would have to play a part in getting their membership, getting their the target population engaged politically also. So I'm going to ask Dr. Anthony to expand more.
Thank you, Mr. President. In terms of the private sector involvement, certainly we want them to be on board with the vaccine, and our intention is to, once we get the vaccine into Guyana, and even before we get the vaccine, that we will also be conducting training with them pertaining to the vaccine. We'll get them to dedicate special staff that we can work with and train to give these vaccines. And it's not only the private hospitals, but we intend to also work with private physicians to make sure that this vaccine, when we get them, can be quickly rolled out to everyone as quickly as possible. But in rolling out the vaccine, there would be certain requirements because they'll have to make copious records for us and pass that back to the national program. And they would also have to do some monitoring for us and present those records to us. And once they're compliant with that, we will be rolling out vaccines to them as well.
The final question here, Mr. President, this one is coming from Julia Johnson of the Prime News. How soon is the COVID vaccination education and or awareness expected to start? And two, instead of arresting persons for breaching COVID guidelines, why not fine them $25,000? That ought to get participants to operate within the guidelines to reduce the spread.
Thank you very much, Julia, for those questions. We take the point that there are other ways in which you can enforce, making it a ticketing, giving a ticket, charging a fine, but the court itself allows for fines to be given. But I take the point that that is also a long process, and maybe you can look at a more direct way of enforcing a fine. This is something that I'm sure the task force would have considered, but it also has to do with, economic and social implications. Some persons will afford to pay the $25,000 like nothing, whilst you have persons who may not afford to pay the $25,000. So you have persons who are in a position to afford it would continuously say, well, we can always pay the $25,000. That is nothing. That is not to say that your point does not have merit. It has tremendous merit. But these are some of the other factors also that we have to weigh into that, and I'm sure the task force would take it into consideration. In relation to the awareness campaign and education, I know this is a big part of what the Ministry of Health is planning. I'll ask Dr. Anthony to address it directly. Thank you.
Thank you again, Mr. President, and thank you, Julia, for that question. In February, we are going to have a more aggressive approach in terms of talking more of the vaccines and working with the media to get that message across pertaining to vaccines. And as I said, we'll be using our risk communication strategy in doing so. So you can expect that next month we'll be doing a lot of that, and we hope that we can get all the media entities to collaborate with us as we get this message across to the Guyanese public.
Thank you very much. Before we close, I want to take this opportunity to thank all our frontline workers, especially our health workers, for the work they continue to do. I ask all Guyanese to continue to do your part in staying safe, making it easier for our frontline workers, and protecting your families. My fellow Guyanese, I committed to you that I'll be open, transparent, and accountable in the handling of all aspects of government business. today is one such forum in which we did not only open ourselves to the media, but to all Guyanese, members of the regional international community or diaspora. You all had a chance to ask us questions, to engage us, and I want you to know that this is the way that we will work. We're accountable to you, the people. We have to answer to you, and I am open and ready to do just that consistently and continuously in the interests of Guyana and Guyanese. Thank you very much. God bless all of you. Thank you.